Samuel woke up before the sun, as usual. The rooster's crow was still just a whisper in the darkness, but the farmer was already on his feet, pulling on worn boots and adjusting the hat that had begun to fade over time. His routine was a predictable trail, checking fences, feeding the livestock, inspecting the vegetable crops, and tending the garden beds. Every action was familiar, repeated, almost mechanical. The solitude, though heavy, did not bother him. The land, the silence, and the rhythm of the countryside were his constant companions. He needed no one else, or at least that's what he told himself every morning. After a few hours tending to his morning chores, Samuel prepared the baskets of eggs, cheese, and fresh vegetables. The old pickup truck, still reliable despite groaning on the steepest inclines, was loaded and ready for the trip to town. The dirt road, flanked by golden fields, seemed to stretch on endlessly, and Samuel enjoyed the silence it offered. Only nature broke the monotony. The wind rustling through the leaves, the distant sound of a creek, and occasionally the bird's song. The inn was his only regular contact with the outside world. Located at the crossroads of two roads, it was a simple wooden building with doors and windows that creaked when opened. Until that morning, the elderly lady who ran the place always greeted him with a warm smile, served fresh coffee, and listened without hurry. But as he stepped across the threshold that day, Samuel immediately noticed that something had changed. Behind the counter stood a woman he did not know. Her brown hair was tied back carelessly, her delicate hands already showing signs of nervousness, and her eyes reflected a mix of fatigue and determination. She noticed his truck arriving and lifted her head, attempting a smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "I'm Clara, the new manager here." Samuel studied her without showing emotion. Every detail seemed out of place in that simple, rugged environment. The inn was not the kind of place for delicate gestures or aesthetic concerns. Life was practical, straightforward. He tilted his head in a dry nod, replied with a brief good morning, and went straight to check the customer table. In his mind, he catalogued her already. From the city, too fragile for this place. Clara noticed his critical gaze but did not let it shake her. There was something in her posture, even without words, that contained strength. She took a deep breath and began organizing the counter, trying not to be distracted by the tall, serious man who simply placed his goods on the table, counting the baskets silently. Every gesture of his was measured, efficient, almost rigid. She felt a chill in her stomach, not fear, but a challenge. She knew she would have to prove she could handle both this environment and this suspicious man. Customers began to arrive slowly. Men in worn boots and sun-weathered faces entered, ordered coffee, made small deals, and left. Clara tried to offer attention, taking notes of orders, attempting to be quick and efficient. Samuel observed everything, saying nothing. When someone asked for fresh eggs, he said simply, "These are the best batch today." Clara noticed the firm, almost harsh tone, but with a touch of honesty she could not deny. He did not exaggerate. He did not lie. Every word was direct, without embellishment. In a way, it impressed her. It was not hostility. It was just a way of protecting oneself from disappointment, a silent defense cultivated over years of solitude. While arranging a basket for a customer, Samuel noticed her trying to place small flowers in a vase on the counter. He raised an eyebrow. "This is an inn, not a tea room," he said gravely. "Flowers won't change anything." Clara took a deep breath and did not reply immediately, but silently she adjusted the vase, knowing that every gesture she made was a proof that she could adapt. She needed to show she was not just a lost city woman, but someone who could make this place thrive. The rest of the day passed with silent interactions and subtle observations. Samuel noticed how she moved, the way she tried to smile at each customer, even when exhausted. Clara noticed every gesture of his, the way he checked the products, ensuring everything was correct, leaving nothing out of place. Despite first impressions, both began to feel a quiet curiosity. As the afternoon wore on and the sunlight turned the wooden floor golden, Samuel put away the remaining goods. Clara, on the other side of the counter, finally smiled genuinely, though still timidly. There was a moment of shared silence, without words, yet full of mutual recognition. He did not know it yet, but that day would mark the beginning of an unexpected change. Samuel, who had been trapped in the routine and solitude of the farm, would start to realize that maybe, just maybe, life could offer more than fields, fences, and livestock. And Clara, who had come to the countryside simply to start over, would begin to see that this man, rigid and silent, could become her support, and maybe something more, maybe something she did not dare yet to name. When he left the inn, the pickup groaning over the stones of the road, both knew this encounter would not be the last. Something was beginning there, delicate, silent, yet full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, Samuel felt a small spark of curiosity about what the coming days might bring. The dirt road stretched ahead, but now it carried a different weight. Not just goods, not just routine, but the promise of meetings that could change their lives forever.
The next day, Samuel woke up to the same routine. The sun was still just hinting at the horizon when he was already walking through the fields, checking the northern fence where a few oxen were trying to push against the old barrier. The wind carried the scent of the earth, damp from the previous night, mingled with the subtle fragrance of the flowers Clara had placed on the inn's counter. He frowned, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling. Flowers in a place like this? It seemed absurd, yet he couldn't help but think about them. Upon arriving at the inn, Clara was already setting up breakfast for the regular customers. She had spent the night planning small changes that, to her, could make the place feel warmer. Clean tablecloths on the tables, flowers in strategic corners, and a small blackboard with the day's menu. It seemed like a simple gesture, but it meant that she was determined to leave her mark, even if timidly. "Good morning, Samuel," she said, trying to sound casual. "The coffee is fresh, if you'd like a cup before heading to the farm." He only nodded and began placing the products on the counter, not approaching the drink. He glanced at her. Clara was meticulous, efficient, yet there was still something in the hesitation of her movements that made it clear she felt out of place. He had reason to think that city folks weren't prepared for this life, but something within him stirred, a silent curiosity he didn't admit, not even to himself. The first customers arrived early, men and women accustomed to the simple routine of the road. A group of construction workers ordered strong coffee and fresh bread. Samuel observed how Clara served, interacted, smiled, and began noticing small details that escaped most people. The precision with which she balanced trays, the care not to spill anything, her attention to each customer's order. She was learning, and quickly. "Looks like the city lady knows what she's doing," one customer commented, laughing as he took his coffee. Clara just smiled, blushing slightly. Samuel, overhearing this, raised an eyebrow. It wasn't so much the remark, but the silent acknowledgement that she was not there merely to take up space. She was there to adapt, learn, and grow. And that stirred something inside him, though he refused to admit it. The day dragged on, and Samuel began noticing other small changes. Clara straightening misaligned chairs, sweeping up crumbs no one else would notice, patiently attending to irritable customers. She didn't complain, didn't play the victim. He who had always approached the world in a direct, practical manner felt a strange admiration. It wasn't love yet or overt affection, but it was something that unsettled him. He wasn't used to being observed or observing someone so attentively. As the afternoon arrived, a small incident occurred. A heavy truck got stuck on the road, and a customer asked for help. Samuel, without hesitation, went to the vehicle while Clara tried to handle the customers alone. She watched from inside the inn, concerned, realizing that despite his tough exterior and curt manner, the man was reliable. He didn't seem rude without reason, There was a silent code of honor and responsibility guiding every action. After helping the driver get the truck unstuck, Samuel returned inside, sweaty and dirty with earth. Clara, seeing him enter, noticed something new. Behind the rigid appearance, there was care, effort, and commitment. She smiled, this time without hesitation. "Looks like the road isn't as easy as it seems," she said, trying to break the silence. He merely nodded and wiping his hands on his apron. But when he looked at her, he saw something that made him quickly look away. A sparkle in her eyes, a curiosity that mirrored his own. Both were beginning to realize that this forced coexistence could become something more than complicated than mere routine. In the following hours, Samuel allowed himself small moments of observation. How Clara arranged the tables, how she interacted with customers, and how she seemed to care about every detail of the place. He noticed the care she took when serving a cup of coffee to an elderly man, the delicate way she cleaned the counter, the way she smiled even when someone complained. Every gesture was a silent proof that she was genuinely trying to integrate. Clara, in turn, began observing Samuel more closely. She realized he was not just the gruff farmer everyone feared. There were layers of patience, dedication, and sensitivity hidden behind that serious gaze. She began to imagine what life beside him would be like, not only in the inn, but on the farm, living the routine he cherished so much. The thought scared her, yet it also intrigued her. When night finally fell, the inn's activity slowed. Samuel put away the remaining baskets, checked the products, and prepared to return to the farm. Before leaving, Clara approached. "It was a good day," she said, simple yet full of meaning. He only nodded, without words. But as he climbed into the pickup truck, he felt something he hadn't in years: anticipation, a slight anxiety about what the next days might bring. She felt it too, though she tried to hide it, smiling as she organized the counter for the next day. That night, Samuel drove along the dirt road back to the farm, thinking about the woman who challenged his quiet convictions. He would never admit it, not even to himself, but something about her calm, persistent, attentive presence stirred him in ways he could not fully understand. Clara, meanwhile, closed the inn, cleaning every table with care, remembering his gestures, his few but precise words. She knew the next day would bring new challenges, but also the chance to keep building something there, something that could become more than just work, perhaps trust, friendship, and in time, something even deeper. And so, as the moon rose over the dirt road, the two of them, separated by only a few kilometers, began to realize that this casual encounter could be the beginning of something transformative.
The next day dawned hot, the sun filtering through thin clouds. Samuel was already at the farm when Clara arrived at the inn. She felt the weight of being alone in charge of the place, but also the challenge of continuing to prove herself, not to the customers, but to the man who had quietly sparked something in her curiosity. As she opened the inn's doors, Clara noticed that the morning customers were the usual: workers, travelers, and a few longtime locals. She tidied the counter, checked the coffee, and took a deep breath before serving the first customer of the day. The chime of the bell signaled the start of a predictable routine, but she didn't know that Samuel would arrive earlier than expected that morning. When he entered, boots dusty and hands still dirty from morning chores, Samuel scanned the room with his critical gaze. The vase of flowers was still in the same spot, and the clean tablecloths on the tables contrasted strangely with the worn floor and old furniture. He said nothing, but Clara sensed his silent evaluation and felt a pang of anxiety. "Good morning, Samuel," she said, trying to sound casual, hiding her nervousness. "Fresh coffee, as always." He simply nodded. Words weren't necessary to communicate what he thought. Clara, accustomed to quick and cordial interactions in the city,
found herself surprised by the weight of his silence. But she didn't back down. She prepared 2 cups and, without waiting for him to speak, placed one in front of him. "No sugar," he said simply, taking the cup with his calloused hands. It was a small detail, but the direct way he spoke made her feel that every gesture of his was precise. There was no pretense, only honesty. It intrigued her. No matter how much she tried to judge the man as rude and old-fashioned, she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something behind that serious gaze. The customers began to arrive, and the inn quickly fell into the expected chaos. Clara tried to manage everything on her own, but Samuel, almost automatically, began to help. It wasn't kindness, it was efficiency. When a traveler dropped coins and goods, he not only picked them up, but organized what could have been lost. Clara watched, surprised. Each of his gestures, though without warmth, demonstrated competence and care. "I didn't expect someone from the city to handle so many people," remarked a regular customer, laughing as he sipped his coffee. Clara smiled, but the comment carried a type of comparison that made her feel judged. Deep down, she knew this was how Samuel saw her, someone who might break under the pressure of the simple, hard life of the countryside. She wanted to prove him wrong, and, of course, she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Yet she inevitably felt she needed to prove it to him. The tension between them became noticeable when a small incident occurred. A package of cheese fell from a shelf, scattering across the floor. Clara hurried to pick it up, but the scene was about to become embarrassing in front of an impatient customer. Samuel, who had just come from the stockroom, picked up the largest piece of cheese and handed it to her. "Here, be more careful next time," he said, without a reproachful tone, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. Clara felt a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. He hadn't shouted, hadn't made a scene. He had simply taken control of the situation. It intrigued her even more. There was something in him that balanced rigor with silent respect. During the lunch lull, when the rush subsided, Clara finally allowed herself a break. Samuel, who normally never paused to chat, sat across the table, taking a slice of bread he had brought. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but full of possibilities. "Have you lived here your whole life?" she asked, trying to start a conversation. "Yes," he replied, looking out the window. "I've always lived on the farm, as long as I can remember." There was something in the way he spoke, simple and direct, that conveyed not only fact, but also pride and attachment. Clara realized that this life, which seemed harsh and limited, had its own beauty and security. "And you, always lived in the city?" he asked, glancing at her. "Yes, until recently. I just got divorced. I came here to start over." Samuel didn't comment, only nodded. There was a silent understanding there, something that didn't need to be verbalized. He didn't ask for details, didn't press. He simply acknowledged that she was there by her own choice, and that seemed respectable. Throughout the day, small gestures began to draw them closer without either realizing it. He picked up items she dropped, she straightened tables he had shifted. Every movement was a silent dance of cooperation, even though neither wanted to admit it. They observed each other, learned about one another, and the initial tension began to transform into something more complex: curiosity, respect, and perhaps the first glimpse of trust. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Samuel put away the remaining goods and prepared to return to the farm. Before leaving, Clara approached holding a small basket of vegetables he always liked to take. "I made this thinking of you, just a little help for your trip." Samuel took the basket, surprised. It wasn't anything grand, but her thoughtfulness touched something in him. He nodded, silently, and turned to leave. On the dirt road, driving back to the farm,
Samuel realized that his mind kept returning to her. It wasn't obvious attraction, nor a declared feeling, but something more subtle, the awareness that a presence was beginning to fill a space he hadn't known was empty. Clara, meanwhile, closed the inn and exhaled deeply. She knew that day had been different. Samuel hadn't radically changed his rigid demeanor, but there were small cracks, signs of curiosity and interest she was determined to explore. As night fell over the countryside, they remained separated by kilometers, yet connected by a silent tension. Both began to realize that this casual encounter, which started with critical glances and silent judgments, could be the beginning of something deeper, something that would challenge their routines, their defenses, and possibly even their own expectations about love and companionship. At that moment, Samuel and Clara didn't know they were about to embark on a series of days that would change their lives forever. Every gesture, every observation, every small interaction built on that second day at the inn laid the groundwork for a relationship that would slowly break down the rigidity of both, opening space for trust, care, and eventually genuine affection.
The morning began cold, with mist wrapping around the fields along the road. Samuel was already at the farm when Clara arrived at the inn, carrying some boxes of fresh products to restock. She felt more confident, but there was still nervousness in every step, a mixture of anticipation and fear of making a mistake. "Good morning," said Samuel, without changing his usual expression. "You're early." "Good morning," Clara replied, trying to sound casual, though her heart raced under his gaze. "I thought I could get some things done before the customers arrived." Samuel only nodded. He wasn't used to compliments, much less conversations with women outside his daily routine. But there was something in her determination, the way she moved through the space, that drew a strange attention from him. The first customer arrived, a neighboring farmer who regularly bought Samuel's products. Clara stepped forward to serve him, but stumbled over one of the boxes freshly placed on the floor. Samuel was only a few steps away and reflexively caught her arm before she fell. "Careful," he said, firm, yet with a slight tension in his voice. She looked at him, blushing, and their hands remained briefly joined. The contact lasted only seconds, but it was enough to send a silent spark through them. Clara laughed nervously, trying to hide her blush, and Samuel looked away, feeling something uncomfortable and new, a warmth he couldn't explain. "Sorry," she murmured, attempting to reorganize the boxes. "It's fine," he replied, shortly, but there was softness in his tone. The day went on, but the small accident seemed to linger between them. Every glance became more attentive, every gesture more conscious. When Samuel picked up products, she moved closer to help, and often their hands brushed, even if by accident. Always brief, but each touch carried a silent tension, a subtle warning that something was changing. During lunch, Clara made coffee for both of them. She placed the cup in front of him and leaned to grab a piece of toast. Samuel, approaching to say something, lightly bumped into her. They lost their balance for an instant and ended up with their faces almost touching, a brief, involuntary contact that left them frozen for a fraction of a second. "Sorry," murmured Clara, blushing and quickly stepping back. "No problem," he replied, his voice slightly lower than usual. Deep down, though, neither truly wanted to move away. Later, while he was organizing boxes in the stockroom, Clara came in to help him. A package slipped from Samuel's hands and rolled toward her. Instinctively, he caught it, but the motion made him lean, and his shoulder brushed hers. "Whoa," said Clara, surprised, but she didn't pull away. The warmth of his body, even briefly, made her restless. "Sorry," Samuel repeated,
feeling the same discomfort and curiosity he couldn't define. They laughed nervously, but there was something different in that laughter. Lightness, silent intimacy, and the sense that this physical closeness, even accidental, was creating an unexpected bond. By late afternoon, Samuel decided he needed to go to the farm to check on the cattle, and Clara offered to help him carry some boxes to the pickup. Walking side by side along the dirt road, each step seemed synchronized without them realizing it. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, creating a scene reminiscent of a romantic movie where every shadow seemed longer and every silhouette closer. "Do you always carry everything by yourself?" Clara asked, trying to make conversation, unaware that her voice sounded softer than usual. "Usually, yes, but I don't mind the help." When they reached the pickup, Samuel held one of the boxes while Clara held the other. In the effort to balance the weight, they leaned against each other again. This time, their eyes met for a slightly longer moment. Samuel noticed the sparkle in her eyes, Clara felt the firmness in him, and both laughed awkwardly. But there was something more, a silent acknowledgement that this closeness was not just physical, but emotional. As he drove back to the farm, Clara walked alongside the pickup, picking up products that accidentally fell. Every nervous laugh, every inadvertent touch heightened the tension between them. It was subtle, but intense. The kind of moment in romantic movies that makes the audience hold their breath waiting for the inevitable kiss, the more intimate touch, or the first conscious gesture of affection. When they arrived at the farm, Samuel helped Clara onto the small porch before the sky fully darkened. She thanked him with a smile, looking at him in a way he had never seen before. Vulnerable, curious, almost disarmed. Samuel, in turn, realized he was smiling involuntarily, something he hadn't done in years. "The tie was different," she said, trying not to sound shy, but failing. "Yes," he replied, curtly, but with a tone that suggested something more. They said goodbye with a wave, but neither truly moved away immediately. Samuel stayed watching Clara walk to the gate, thinking about the strange urge to have her stay, even for just a little more. And Clara, meanwhile, felt her heart race, knowing that day had changed something inside her. Every accident, every touch, every shared glance was building a tension that couldn't be ignored. That night, as Samuel gazed at the starry sky, he realized something new. Clara was not just the inn manager, nor merely a city woman trying to adapt. She was becoming a presence he desired, even if he didn't fully understand why. And Clara, closing the inn, felt that she had found a new and safe territory, a place where she could not only restart her life, but also explore feelings long dormant. The day ended, but something lingered in the air. The promise of closeness, of accidental gestures turning deliberate, and moments that could change not just their routine, but their lives. And without knowing it, Samuel and Clara were beginning to realize that this silent story, full of glances and unintentional touches, could grow into something deep and true.
The morning brought a gentle breeze carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Samuel was at the farm tending the cattle when Clara arrived at the inn, carrying baskets of fresh bread and fruit to restock. She walked carefully, trying not to stumble, while wearing a smile that reflected the confidence she was still building. When he saw her enter later, Samuel noticed something different. Her face carried an expression of serenity, as if she was finally getting used to the rhythm of the countryside. Without realizing it, he let his gaze linger on her longer than usual. It wasn't a critical assessment, but something that bordered on silent admiration.
The first subtle gesture occurred when Clara bent down to pick up a fallen pan and her arm brushed lightly against Samuel's as he passed by to collect products from the stockroom. Both froze for a fraction of a second, and Samuel felt an unfamiliar warmth run through his arm. She looked away, blushing, but maintained her posture as if it had been entirely natural, though she knew it hadn't. Throughout the morning, Clara began noticing details about Samuel she hadn't before. The way he arranged the products carefully, even when alone. The way he adjusted his hat while looking out the window. The small crease that appeared on his forehead when he was thinking. Each detail was a silent clue about the life he led, and she found herself smiling to herself, admiring the solitary routine he maintained with such care. When a customer dropped some coins, Samuel quickly bent down to pick them up, but this time Clara anticipated and grabbed his hand in the process, preventing him from leaning too far. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough for both to feel the growing closeness. No words were spoken about it. The gesture spoke for itself. Later, during a break, Samuel helped Clara carry some baskets to the stockroom. Walking side by side down the narrow corridors, their arms brushed lightly several times. Each touch was brief, almost accidental, but both began to sense the silent electricity between them. She smiled with small teasing gestures, playing with his serious demeanor, and he responded with a slight raising of an eyebrow or a half smile, almost imperceptible signals, yet full of meaning. While organizing products, Samuel handed a cup of coffee to Clara, but the gesture lingered slightly longer than normal. And their hands touched lightly. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and they held that silent exchange for a few seconds, saying nothing, but with a mutual understanding that this closeness was no longer casual. At lunchtime, Clara brought Samuel a piece of cake she had baked herself. He hesitated, looking at her, and then smiled openly for the first time that day, accepting the gesture wordlessly. Her smile responded immediately, and they both laughed softly, as if sharing a silent secret. As the sun began to set, Samuel decided to take her to see part of his farm. They walked together through the fields, side by side, each movement filled with small intimacies, an arm brushing another, hands passing close, glances lingering longer than usual, and timid laughter at minor stumbles. Clara felt the warmth of their closeness, but also the safety of being with someone who, despite his rigidity, cared for her in a quiet, steady way. At the end of the day, Samuel escorted her back to the inn to ensure she was safe. Before parting, their hands touched again, this time briefly holding the door. There was no kiss, no declaration, but both felt the tension in the air, a silent promise. Something was beginning, something that didn't yet need a name, but was growing with each gesture, each touch, each lingering glance. As he walked home, Samuel realized he was thinking of her with unexpected frequency. Every gesture she had made that day had left a subtle mark on his mind. Clara, closing the inn, felt the same. Small, silent, yet powerful demonstrations of affection had begun to build something between them, something that no routine or distance could erase. That night, under the starry sky, Samuel and Clara were separated by miles, yet connected by a network of small gestures carrying silent intensity. They had not yet confessed nor given in to more obvious impulses, but every accidental touch, every smile, every prolonged glance was proof that their relationship was growing slowly, naturally, and with deep emotional resonance.
The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers across the fields. Samuel was already at the farm, checking on the cattle and repairing a loose fence, when Clara arrived at the inn with baskets of fresh bread and fruits to replenish the stock. She moved carefully, her steps measured, Yet there was a subtle lightness in her posture, a quiet confidence that she was slowly building. Samuel had already entered the inn when she arrived later that morning. As he walked past the counter, he noticed how she had arranged the shelves and tables. Everything was in its place, neat and inviting. Something about the attention to detail made him pause for a brief moment longer than usual. He did not comment, he never did, but the quiet admiration was there, even if unacknowledged. The first small gesture happened when Clara bent down to pick up a dropped napkin. Samuel, passing by with a crate of vegetables, instinctively reached out to steady her. Their hands brushed briefly, and both froze for a fraction of a second. She looked up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, while he quickly turned his gaze away. A warmth sprang through his chest that he didn't quite understand. As the morning progressed, subtle moments continued to emerge. Samuel noticed how Clara moved with care, balancing trays effortlessly, her eyes scanning the room, anticipating needs before they were voiced. He found himself observing, in a quiet, almost reluctant way, the way she handled her tasks with patience and precision. Later, while organizing crates together in the storeroom, Samuel dropped a small bag of flour. Reflexively, Clara reached to catch it at the same time he did, their hands touching again. This time, the contact lingered slightly longer. They exchanged a glance, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them, and smiled, a fleeting, delicate connection that neither of them could easily ignore. During the lunch break, Clara poured Samuel a cup of coffee. As she placed it in front of him, their fingers brushed once more. Neither pulled away immediately. Samuel held his gaze a moment longer than usual, and Clara, feeling a flutter in her chest, gave a small, shy smile. It was an exchange of emotions conveyed entirely without words: trust, curiosity, and something that hinted at longing. Later in the afternoon, Samuel invited Clara to help him carry a few crates outside. Walking side by side along the dirt path, the sunlight casting long shadows, their movements were almost synchronized, though neither spoke about it. Their arms occasionally brushed, small touches that left a warmth lingering long after they separated. Clara laughed softly when Samuel accidentally nudged her with an elbow, and he returned a brief, tight-lipped smile, feeling something unfamiliar yet comforting. By evening, Samuel escorted Clara back to the inn to ensure she was safe after a long day. As they paused at the door, their hands met briefly again, resting lightly on the frame, almost casually. Neither spoke, neither moved away too quickly. The silence between them was charged, a quiet promise forming through tiny gestures. Something unspoken had begun, a connection built not through words, but through the subtle language of touch and presence. As Samuel walked back to the farm under the darkening sky, he realized he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every small gesture, every fleeting touch had left an impression, a delicate thread of feeling weaving itself into the fabric of his thoughts. Clara, closing up the inn and looking over the fields, felt the same. The day had been ordinary in its duties, yet extraordinary in the quiet intimacies that had passed between them. Each look, each accidental touch, each small act of care had been a tiny step towards something larger, something neither of them yet named, but both felt growing steadily in the space between them. By nightfall, Samuel and Clara were separated by miles, yet connected by subtle gestures that spoke volumes. The brief brush of hands, the shared smiles, the quiet presence of someone slowly becoming essential. It was in these understated moments, these delicate exchanges, that the beginnings of their story were truly taking shape. The next morning, the countryside was shrouded in mist, softening the edges of the fields and the worn dirt road.
Samuel was already at the farm, repairing a broken gate, when Clara arrived at the inn with crates of fresh produce. She moved with her usual careful precision, yet her steps seemed lighter that day, as if carried by a mixture of anticipation and unease. Samuel noticed her immediately when she entered. The morning light caught her hair just so, illuminating the strands that had escaped her loose braid. He found himself watching her longer than usual before clearing his throat and returning to the crates. Clara, sensing his gaze, quickly looked away, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. She tried to focus on her work, but the awareness of being observed created an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. The first tension arose during the breakfast rush. A local farmer arrived earlier than expected, asking for eggs and bread. Clara moved quickly to prepare the order, but in her haste, she accidentally knocked over a small jar of jam. Samuel, already carrying a crate toward the counter, bent to help, but in their movement, their knees brushed. Both froze for a heartbeat, the contact brief yet electric. "Are you okay?" Samuel asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm fine," Clara replied quickly, but the small laugh that followed betrayed her nervousness. The incident, though minor, lingered between them, a reminder of the magnetic tension that had been quietly building. Neither addressed it directly, but both carried the memory of that fleeting touch for the rest of the morning. Later, while arranging the shelves together, Clara noticed Samuel pausing over a crate, frowning slightly. "Something wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. "Just checking the quality," he replied curtly. "Nothing for you to worry about." There was a slight edge to his tone, one that Clara hadn't heard before. She felt a pang of confusion, wondering if she had done something wrong. The subtle misunderstanding hung between them, a delicate tension that neither could quite articulate. Samuel, meanwhile, was aware that his words might have sounded sharper than intended. He looked at her, realizing her concern, and softened just slightly, though he didn't admit it aloud. During the quiet of the afternoon, Samuel and Clara found themselves alone in the back storage area, organizing crates. Their movements were careful but intimate in a way that neither fully acknowledged. A small bag of flour tipped over, and they both reached to catch it, their hands brushing again. This time, their fingers lingered a little longer. Samuel noticed the warmth of her hand. Clara noticed the firmness of his grip. Neither spoke, but their shared glance carried a silent understanding, a mixture of apology, amusement, and something unspoken that drew them closer. Later, while preparing for the evening, Samuel offered to help Clara carry crates to the truck. They walked side by side along the dirt road, the fading sunlight painting the fields in gold and amber. Samuel accidentally nudged her with his elbow, and she laughed softly, the sound light and melodic. He felt a small, unbidden smile form on his face, and for a moment neither spoke, letting the rhythm of their steps and the subtle brush of arms carry their unspoken connection. At the end, as Samuel helped arrange some final deliveries, Clara reached out to steady a box he was holding. Their hands touched, and she felt the warmth of his palm. He glanced at her briefly, eyes locking for a second longer than necessary. There was no confession, no declaration, only a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Before leaving, Samuel paused at the door. Clara, sensing he might say something, stepped slightly closer. "See you tomorrow?" she said softly, a hint of hope. "Tomorrow," he echoed, nodding, his expression unreadable but carrying an unspoken promise. As he walked back toward the farm, Samuel reflected on the subtle misunderstandings and small intimacies of the day. The brief conflict, the accidental touches, the unspoken words, all of that created a tension that was both challenging and exciting.
Clara, closing up the inn, felt the same. Each subtle gesture, each quiet moment of shared effort was a brick in the foundation of something delicate yet undeniable. By nightfall, both Samuel and Clara were left with the lingering awareness of each other's presence, a thread of connection woven through the small conflicts and gentle affections of the day. It was a quiet, patient romance, built not on declarations or grand gestures, but on shared moments, fleeting touches, and subtle acknowledgement of feelings neither dared to name aloud.
The morning fog clung stubbornly to the fields, and Samuel was already at the barn feeding the animals when Clara arrived with a basket of fresh produce. There was a calm in the air, as if the world itself was giving them a chance to slow down and notice each other. When Clara entered the inn, Samuel looked up from the crates he was carrying. For a moment, neither spoke. Their eyes met, and there was a quiet acknowledgement. The tension, the curiosity, and the unspoken feelings that had been building between them all these weeks were now undeniable. Later, as Clara helped him carry a few boxes to the barn, a sudden gust of wind caused a loose crate to topple. Samuel reached for it instinctively, but Clara moved too, and they collided. This time, their faces were mere inches apart, and in the panic of the moment, Samuel brushed a strand of hair from her face. I didn't mean to," Clara began, but he cut her off softly. "It's fine," he said, his voice slow. There was a tenderness in it that he had never allowed himself to show before. They laughed awkwardly, the ice between them breaking. Samuel took a deep breath, finally letting himself be vulnerable. "Clara, I've been meaning to say," he started. His hands were rough, but his gesture was careful as he took hers. "I didn't think I'd feel this way about anyone, about someone from outside this life, but I do." Clara felt her heart swell. She had been fighting the same feelings, the same fear of opening herself to someone whose world was so different from hers. "Samuel, I feel the same," she whispered. "I've tried to keep it in check, but I can't." For the first time, they allowed themselves to embrace fully, holding each other close amidst the scent of hay and earth. The tension, the uncertainty, the stolen touches, they all melted away in that moment. Even with their confession, life was not without challenges. Samuel's farm required constant attention, and Clara's responsibilities at the inn were growing. They found themselves missing each other during the day, each longing for the moments they could spend together. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly, dark clouds spilling rain across the fields. Samuel was out checking the fences when Clara arrived to help him secure the barn. The rain soaked them both within minutes, and instead of retreating, they laughed, running together between the wind-whipped trees, their clothes plastered and muddy. "You're impossible," Clara shouted over the roar of the storm, ducking under an overhanging roof. "And you love it," Samuel called back, smiling, grabbing her hand to steady her as she slipped on the mud. They collided, laughing, and in that chaotic, drenched moment, Samuel pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't tentative. This time it was sure, urgent, and full of the passion they had been denying themselves for weeks. Clara responded immediately, wrapping her arms around him as the rain poured around them. Later, soaked and breathless, they held each other close in the barn, sharing quiet words and gentle touches. The storm outside became a metaphor for the emotions they had held back, now released, free and fierce. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the fields, drying the rain-soaked earth and bathing the farm in golden light. Samuel and Clara moved together in ease, carrying out their morning routines side by side, their hands brushing naturally, their laughter echoing across the farm. Weeks passed and their connection deepened.
Samuel taught Clara the rhythms of farm life, and she shared with him moments of the world beyond the fields, the stories, music, and ideas she had carried from the city. They complemented each other perfectly. His stability and grounding softened by her warmth and lightness, her curiosity and openness anchored by his quiet strength. One evening, under a sky streaked with the colors of sunset, Samuel took Clara to the small clearing where he had often gone alone to think. "I was thinking," he began, taking her hand, "you've brought something here that I didn't even know I was missing. You've made this place feel like home. And you've made me feel safe, like I can finally breathe," she said softly. They embraced, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear. The connection they had built over weeks of subtle touches, small gestures, and shared moments culminated in a bond both tender and unshakable. Months later, the inn had become more than just a workplace for Clara. It was a shared home. Samuel and Clara had created a life together, balancing farm work with the warmth of the inn, hosting travelers, and enjoying quiet nights under the stars. Their love was built not on grand declarations, but on trust, daily care, and the intimacy of knowing each other fully. In the golden light of an autumn afternoon, Samuel watched Clara tending flowers in the garden. She looked up, smiling, and he felt a familiar flutter in his chest. Walking over, he took her hand, and together they stood, silent, watching the fields stretch into the horizon. Their story, born of routine, chance, and small, tender moments, had grown into something enduring, a love grounded in respect, nurtured by shared labor, and illuminated by the small, everyday acts that made life and each other meaningful. And for Samuel and Clara, the farmhouse, the inn, and the fields were no longer just places. They were home, together. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and follow our upcoming videos to continue exploring new narratives.